Hey, good morning, Choice Residential. Hope your day's off to a fantastic start. So, as you know, with the new NAR settlement, you have to have a written agreement with any buyer before touring a home with them. There are two options we have here in North Carolina: Form 201, which is the non exclusive buyer agency agreement, and then this one that we're going to go over today, Form 201, which is the form you're most familiar with seeing, the exclusive buyer agency agreement. So, this introduction to a client will typically come at one of two times, either in the very beginning of a relationship with a client, particularly if they are someone you have a relationship with, let's say a past client, a referral from your database, something along those lines. Form 203 might be a more common form for you to use when you are meeting someone who maybe you don't have quite as warm of a relationship with. This could be an intranet lead, a sign call, maybe somebody you meet at an open house. But when you get to the point that you've established rapport with them and you and this client are ready to really make that commitment to each other, then we would move them to this form, Form 201, the exclusive buyer agency agreement. What I want to touch on this morning is specifically paragraph 4, which is the compensation to the firm. And I just want to talk through how to have this discussion and what your options are to put into these blanks in the new NAR settlement world. First thing I want to point out is make sure that you talk about the compensation as being paid to the firm rather than your compensation. That's the way it's actually done, right? The compensation always comes to the firm. But B, it also kind of alleviates some of the conception that the agents make all this money, right? The consumer doesn't need to know what percentage of the compensation goes to you. They just need to know that this is a fee being paid to the real estate firm, not to the agent directly. Keep in mind, even on the new version of our form, you do have the option of charging a retainer fee to your client. You can see that here in paragraph 4A. But what I really want to touch on today is paragraph 4B, the section that talks about what the fee is that's being paid to your client. You can see now there is in bright red a notice here that says do not insert NA 0 or a range of compensation. So let's talk about what you can put in here and what the possible implications are. So let's say, for example, that you wanted to insert into this section 3%. So what you're telling the buyer is that, hey, the fee for my firm's fee for the services is 3% of the sale price. We're going to try to collect that from the listing agent or seller, but if they're not willing to pay it, you would be obligated to pay that. Now, one thing that a lot of agents will tell me is they'll say, well, I want to put 3% in here, but as long as I get paid 2.5%, then I'm not going to make my buyer make up the difference. That's fine. Of course, as a firm, we are not going to require them to make up that difference. It's going to be your decision. But here's the thing. This document is a legal obligation for the buyer to make up that difference. So if they are going to just be okay with you saying that as long as you're getting 2.5%, you're not going to make them make up the difference, they're going to just have to trust you on that. Here's the catch, though. If the buyer is uncomfortable with that and they say, well, I'm willing for you to make 2.5% and I'm willing to pay you up to 2.5%, but I don't want to bridge a gap up to 3%. Well, then you have to make a decision and potentially put 2.5% in here so that they're comfortable and you can move forward. Now, what happens if, in fact, you are offered compensation of 3% on the home that the buyer wants to make an offer on? Because the new version of this agreement also says that the agent cannot make more than what they have listed here in their buyer agency agreement. So if you're offered 3%, you will need to get permission from the buyer in order to receive that extra 0.5% in this example. There is a form for that, Form 770, and I would suspect that in most cases, buyers won't have a problem with you receiving that extra compensation if that's what's being offered proactively by the seller or listing agent. But again, you will have to trust that the buyer will let you receive that, because if they don't sign Form 770 or they don't agree to amend the buyer agency agreement, you aren't legally allowed to receive that extra compensation. So you'll need to trust that they will allow you. But again, if you put 3% in this section, they're the ones that are going to have to trust you that you won't collect the difference as long as you receive 2.5%. So someone has to trust someone in this relationship. And so really the intent of this paragraph or this section on compensation is for the agent to put in the minimum amount that they're willing to accept. So in this kind of situation we've just laid out here, you might want to consider putting 2.5% in there because that's the amount that if you're only offered, let's say 1.5%, you are in fact going to ask the buyer to bridge that gap and get the firm's compensation up to 2.5%. So if 2.5% is the minimum that you're going to accept being paid, that's the number you should put in there. And then my opinion is you should just trust that if a seller or builder happen to be offering more than what you put in there, that your buyer client will in fact agree to let you receive that. I think that's a reasonable way for us to predict that those situations will play out. Now, as a firm, we are not going to set any requirements on what you have to put into this section. So if the fee you want to put in there is 2%, you can do that. Whatever the number that makes sense for you. It also doesn't have to be a percentage. It could be just a flat fee. So let's talk more about what the options are of what type of numbers we can put into this section. I've seen all types of things, and something you may have seen before is an entry like 2.4% for resale, 2.5% for new construction, and 4% for an unrepresented seller or for sale by owner. That is still perfectly acceptable. You can put anything in here as long as it is specific. What I would suggest to you is that we will likely see a wide range of different entries going into this section as time goes on in this post-settlement world. I could envision things like I mentioned, flat fees, but I could also envision very specific compensation ranges based on maybe price point. So an agent might say, well, if the price is less than $500,000, my compensation is 2.5%. If it's between 500 and 1 million or $999,999, the compensation is 2.25%. If it's over $1 million, it's 2%. You could see things like that, or flat fees that are associated with different price points. There could even be much more complicated scenarios where an agent gets paid by the showing, the number of showings that they do. We could see a large number of different styles and types of compensation that agents come up with. Again, at the brokerage level, we aren't going to dictate that, but I'm happy to have conversations with you as you have ideas on how you may want to move forward with compensation. We will also, as a firm internally, continue to talk about what we're seeing out there, what buyer feedback is, what agents are doing, so that you can hear and kind of consume different ideas and strategies that agents are using out there. I will also stay engaged locally, regionally, and nationally in conversations so that we can stay plugged into what other agents in other areas are doing to see if there are strategies that we can extract from them that may benefit you. Now, I think the most likely scenario is that we move forward in somewhat of a traditional sense where agents are putting in simply a percentage. I think that's probably the most dominant way that we will see this move forward, but none of us have a crystal ball. So as you think about it today and moving forward to August 17th or August 6th, when the commission comes out of the MLS, we really want to be crystal clear on how we're describing this to our clients. So again, just to give you just a quick script, and then we'll wrap up the video for today. The way that I would probably talk to a buyer about this is to say, hey, so the fee that my firm expects to make is 2.5%. In most cases, the seller or listing agent are going to be offering that compensation to our firm. And so there won't be really any impact to you in terms of extra costs for you at closing. But if there is a situation in which a house that you want to make an offer on is either not offering compensation at all, or is not offering compensation sufficient to cover the fee that our firm expects to make, then what we will likely do is just simply ask them to pay that compensation as part of the offer making process. So we will secure that before you actually make your offer so that you know if you will be responsible for any of the costs or not. And if you would be responsible for any of those costs, then we have strategies to structure the offer in order to get the seller to actually cover that expense for you. So we'll sort through all of those details based on the specific home that you want to make an offer on and what they are offering to you. But rest assured, you will never be surprised by any costs that you weren't expecting. Everything will be very clear to you before we actually make an offer. I would keep it fairly simple like that and then move on. If you have questions as you are contemplating how you want to present this to clients or what information or fees you want to put in here, certainly reach out to me. Happy to discuss it with you. And it's also a great topic for us to continue to discuss internally on our weekend wrap-up calls. As always, if you have any questions, I'm just a phone call away. Take care.